Chapter 1. The Intuitive Guardian Within. There is a feeling we have all experienced at one point or another. It is that sudden, inexplicable urge to change direction while walking down a familiar street. It is the hesitation you feel before reaching for a door handle, or the unprompted chill that raises the hairs on your arms when a stranger stands just a fraction of an inch too close. We usually dismiss it, we laugh it off as paranoia, or blame it on an overactive imagination, or tell ourselves, we are just being silly. We actively talk ourselves out of our own internal alarms, determined to rely only on what we can easily explain. But what if that feeling is not a trick of the mind? What if it is, in fact, the most sophisticated, high-tech defense mechanism in the natural world? Nature does not leave its creations undefended. Through millions of years of evolution, every creature on Earth has been equipped with the tools necessary for survival. A turtle is given a hardened shell. A wasp is given a stinger. Human beings were not granted the sharpest claws or the thickest hides, but we were given the most complex brain on the planet, an organ that processes subtle environmental shifts faster and more accurately than any supercomputer. We are the apex survivors of an ancient lineage, yet in our modern era, we have become the only creatures on Earth that actively ignore our own survival signals. We routinely elevate social etiquette above our own physical safety. Imagine you are standing in the quiet, carpeted hallway of a hotel late at night. You are exhausted from a long day of travel, holding your room key, just waiting for the heavy metal doors of the elevator to part. The hallway is entirely empty. When the doors finally slide open, there is a man standing inside. He does not look like a monster. He is wearing standard, unremarkable clothing. He's holding a piece of luggage. But the very second your eyes meet his, a heavy, cold anchor drops in your stomach. Your breathing shallows instinctively. A silent, urgent voice in your head screams at you not to step into that confined steel box. What do you do? If you are like most civilized adults in our modern society, you force a polite smile, you completely ignore the screaming voice of millions of years of evolution, and you step inside. Why do we do this? We do it because we do not want to seem rude. We do not want to judge a book by its cover or offend a perfect stranger who has done nothing overtly aggressive. We demand a logical, rational explanation for our fear, and since we cannot instantly produce a spreadsheet of tangible evidence to prove this man is a threat, we convict our own instincts of being irrational. We surrender our primal safety to the fear of social embarrassment. If a wild animal felt that exact same sudden rush of fear, it would flee immediately. It would not pause to wonder if it was hurting the predator's feelings. But human beings worship logic. We have convinced ourselves that if we cannot articulate exactly why we are afraid in a given moment, our fear is invalid. This represents a profound misunderstanding of how human cognition actually works. Intuition is not some mystical, inexplicable phenomenon, nor is it a whimsical emotion. It is a lightning-fast, hyper-logical evaluation of your environment. Your brain acts as a master stagehand, constantly taking in thousands of microsignals that your conscious mind is entirely unaware of. In that hotel hallway, your brain processed the slight unnatural asymmetry of the stranger's stance. It registered that his breathing was heavy, even though he was standing still. It noticed a subtle, predatory focus in his eyes, or perhaps recognized that his luggage did not match the context of a guest staying on that specific floor. Your conscious, plodding, logical mind had not yet processed a single one of these details. But your intuition had already completed the complex mathematics of survival and arrived at the only correct answer: danger. By stepping into the elevator, you are effectively telling your brilliant internal guardian to be quiet. We tell ourselves that human violence is senseless, that it is completely random, and that it strikes out of the blue. When a tragedy occurs, we inevitably hear the same hollow refrains from bystanders and authorities alike, claiming that it came out of nowhere or that no one could have possibly seen it coming. But violence rarely comes out of nowhere. It is a process, and it operates on a universal code. The energy of violence moves through our society with highly predictable warning signs, if only we are willing to look at them. The belief that human behavior is entirely unpredictable is nothing more than a comforting myth. We rely on the predictability of human behavior every single day of our lives. When you drive down a 2-lane highway at 60 miles an hour, you are betting your life on the prediction that the driver of the oncoming 2-ton vehicle will not suddenly swerve into your lane. You read their speed, their trajectory, the slight tilt of their tires, and the attentiveness in their posture, all in a fraction of a second. You are already an absolute master of predicting human behavior in high-stakes environments. You simply have to apply that same inherent mastery to the realm of your own personal safety. If intuition is our greatest ally, denial is our most insidious enemy. Denial is a save now, pay later scheme that offers the illusion of security at the ultimate cost of our awareness. We deny the possibility of violence because facing the reality of it is profoundly uncomfortable. We compartmentalize hazard, convincing ourselves that bad things only happen in other neighborhoods to other kinds of people, or to those who somehow bring it upon themselves. We wrap ourselves in the warm blanket of thinking it will never happen to us. This willful blindness offers a temporary, fragile peace of mind, but it strips us of the ability to take meaningful action. When we refuse to acknowledge that we could ever be a target, we stop looking for the warning signs that precede an attack. We become passive passengers in our own lives, hoping that good luck or the local police or an expensive home security system will do the heavy lifting of keeping us safe. But your safety is your responsibility. It does not belong to the authorities or to technology. It belongs entirely to you. True fear is a gift. It is a brilliant internal guardian that stands ready to warn you of hazards and guide you safely through risky situations. It is vastly different from the lingering neurotic anxiety we feel about a looming deadline at work or the nervous dread of a public speaking engagement. True fear is a sudden, powerful ally that demands your attention and tells you exactly what to do to survive. It might tell you to freeze in place, to stop breathing, to run, or to fight back with everything you have. But it only speaks when there is a genuine reason to listen. We must start giving ourselves permission to hear that inner voice. We must break the habit of constantly searching for an innocent explanation to excuse alarming behavior. The next time you feel a sudden wave of apprehension, do not dismiss it as silly. Do not suppress it for the sake of politeness. Honor the signal your body is sending you. Trust that you are the most sophisticated security system on Earth, and that your instincts have your absolute best interests at heart. Living a life free of unwarranted anxiety does not mean pretending that danger does not exist. It means knowing with absolute certainty that when danger does appear, you have the internal tools to see it coming. Chapter 2. The Universal Code of Violence. Whenever a terrible act of violence occurs, you will inevitably hear the same bewildered descriptions from neighbors and bystanders. They will say that the perpetrator was quiet, that he kept to himself, or that he seemed like a perfectly normal person. We cling to these descriptions with a sense of shock because we are deeply conditioned to believe that dangerous people should look dangerous. We want to believe that those who mean us harm are monsters, hideous creatures who wear their dark intentions on their sleeves, completely divorced from the rest of humanity. But to successfully navigate the world and predict human behavior, we must confront a deeply unsettling truth. Violent people are exactly that. People. They share our psychological makeup, our basic desires, and our humanness. The predator who means to do you harm does not possess glowing eyes or sharp fangs. He wears the exact same camouflage of normalcy that you do. Because we share this human architecture, the methods a predator uses to trap a victim are not mysterious. They are not random lightning strike events. They are calculated social maneuvers designed to exploit the very rules of polite society that we have been taught to obey since childhood. A predator does not simply attack, he conducts a silent, high-stakes interview. He circles, he tests boundaries, and he looks for a specific type of vulnerability. During this interview, he will constantly transmit survival signals, revealing his sinister intent through the very methods he uses to conceal it. To protect ourselves, we must learn to read this universal code. Imagine a woman leaving a large hardware store at dusk. The parking lot is vast, the glowing street lamps casting long, isolated shadows. She is wrestling with a heavy, awkward cart filled with supplies, tired from a long day, her mind already racing ahead to the evening's chores. As she unlocks her trunk and struggles to lift the heaviest box, a man appears, seemingly out of nowhere. He steps into her personal space and says, "Looks like we bought out the whole store today." This is the first signal, a highly sophisticated manipulation known as forced teaming. By using the word "we," the stranger is artificially projecting a shared experience where absolutely none exists. Forced teaming is designed to establish premature trust, creating a false partnership that makes the woman feel it would be rude to rebuff him. True shared predicaments, like being stuck in a broken elevator with a stranger, naturally lower our social boundaries, but when a stranger intentionally forces that teaming upon a solitary target, it is always inappropriate. Before she can even process the sudden proximity, the man flashes a warm, disarming smile and reaches for the box. We are taught to view charm as an inherent positive character trait, but in the context of a stranger approaching an isolated person, charm is a verb. It is a directed instrument, a calculated strategy used to compel, allure, and control. We must rigorously teach ourselves and our children that niceness does not equal goodness. Niceness is merely a decision of social interaction. It is a mask easily worn to lower a victim's defenses. Startled, the woman steps back and politely says she does not need any help. The man pauses, tilting his head with a slight, mocking grin. "Come on," he says. "Don't be one of those stubbornly proud people who can't accept a simple favor." This is a tactic called typecasting. It always involves a slight, easily refuted insult designed specifically to make the victim feel compelled to prove the label wrong. The predator knows that the easiest way to overcome a woman's initial boundary is to challenge her pride, hoping she will cast off the mantle of being stubborn or snobbish by engaging with him. The only effective defense against typecasting is absolute silence, refusing to participate in the manufactured debate. But the woman, feeling the weight of the awkward box and the social pressure of the moment, hesitates. The man immediately presses his advantage by burying her in a sudden avalanche of irrelevant information. He begins rambling about how his sister always pulls a muscle when she tries to lift heavy soil, how he happens to be waiting for his wife who is stuck in line at the register, and how he has nothing but time to kill. This is the strategy of using too many details. When a person is telling the truth, they do not feel doubted, and they do not feel the need to supply excessive supporting evidence. But when a person is lying, they doubt their own credibility, and they throw out dozens of conversational distractions. These details are designed to make you lose sight of the most vital, glaring context of the entire interaction. This is a complete stranger who approached you in a dark parking lot. Before she can protest again, he takes the heavy box from her hands and shoves it into her trunk. This is loan sharking. He has generously provided an unsolicited service, fully intending to collect on the debt. The traditional loan shark lends cash and violently collects a massive interest rate. The predatory criminal lends a moment of unwanted assistance and expects to collect your compliance, your conversation, or your safety. The victim is made to feel a profound sense of obligation, making it incredibly difficult for her to firmly ask him to leave her alone. Sensing her lingering apprehension as she steps backward, the man raises his hands defensively and says, "I'll just push the cart into the return stall and leave you alone. I promise." The unsolicited promise is one of the most reliable and glaring signals of sinister intent. Promises offer absolutely no collateral. They are the hollowest instruments of human speech. A person only offers an unsolicited promise because they can plainly see that you are not convinced of their good intentions. The promise is literally the speaker acknowledging your own intuitive doubt, acting as a mirror that reflects your internal alarm right back at you. When someone offers an unsolicited promise, your internal response should always be a validation of your own fear. Through all of this, there is one signal that stands above the rest, a universal red flag that must never be ignored. It is the discounting of the word no. When the woman initially said she did not need help, the man completely ignored her refusal. The word no is a complete sentence. It is an absolute boundary that must never be negotiated, softened, or compromised. A person who refuses to hear the word no is a person who is actively trying to control you. If you allow a stranger to talk you out of your refusal, you are essentially signaling to them that you are willing to surrender control of the situation. A decent person, one with no self-serving or sinister agenda, will understand a firm boundary, or more likely, would never have approached an isolated woman in the dark to begin with. The fear of appearing rude keeps millions of people locked in conversations and situations they desperately want to escape. But safety is the preeminent concern of all living creatures, and your survival infinitely outweighs the fleeting social comfort of a stranger who refuses to respect your boundaries. The universal code of violence is written in these everyday interactions. Predators rely on your politeness, your conditioning, and your deeply ingrained desire to avoid conflict. But once you understand the mechanics of forced teaming, the deceptive nature of charm, and the profound importance of honoring the word no, the predator loses his power. The camouflage melts away, leaving behind a transparent manipulator whose interview you have just decisively failed. Chapter 3. Predicting the unknown. Imagine standing on your front porch, waving goodbye as a teenager you met barely an hour ago closes the door, leaving her alone with your sleeping infant. This is one of the most profound acts of trust a human being can undertake. We routinely leave our children, our absolute most precious vulnerabilities, in the care of perfect strangers, based on little more than a brief conversation and a polite recommendation from an acquaintance. When you really think about it, the magnitude of this decision is staggering. Yet we make these high-stakes predictions constantly. We just do not always make them well. When interviewing a new caregiver, we desperately want to believe we are making a safe choice. We look for comforting illusions. We notice that she smiles warmly, or that the family dog wags its tail when she walks into the room, and we erroneously conclude that she is a good, trustworthy person. We spend vastly more energy trying to qualify a candidate than disqualify them, searching eagerly for the silver lining while completely ignoring the gathering storm clouds. We would never dare ask the one question that actually matters. Have you ever mistreated a child? We avoid it because it feels incredibly rude or awkward, assuming a guilty person would simply lie to us anyway. But the truth is, asking direct, uncomfortable questions is exactly how we separate the safe from the sinister. The way a person reacts to a boundary-pushing question, whether they become defensive, evasive, or genuinely understanding, tells you far more about their character than their polite smile ever could. We are entirely capable of making flawless predictions if we simply recognize that human behavior, much like gravity, follows essential, predictable rules. We already know what safety looks like in our daily routines, which means we inherently know what danger looks like. We can navigate risk by applying the rule of opposites. Picture a repairman arriving at your home to fix a broken appliance. You already know what favorable, safe behavior looks like in this specific context. He focuses intensely on the broken machine, he respects your privacy, he works efficiently, and he leaves the moment the job is done. Therefore, predicting danger is as simple as flipping those exact traits. If he wanders into bedrooms where there is nothing to repair, if he asks deeply personal questions about who else lives in the house, or if he lingers without any clear purpose, he is displaying the exact opposite of safety. You do not need a criminal psychology degree to know that this situation has become hazardous. You simply need to trust your baseline knowledge of human nature and recognize when the opposite of normal is standing in your living room. To truly master the art of predicting behavior, especially violent or destructive behavior, we must be willing to step completely into the shoes of the person who concerns us. This requires setting aside our own moral compass for a brief moment to view the world through their eyes, no matter how distorted their vision might be. A person does not suddenly snap and commit an act of violence out of nowhere. They arrive at that devastating destination by unconsciously evaluating 4 specific elements: justification, alternatives, consequences, and ability. Consider a bitter, escalating dispute between 2 neighbors over a property line. For years, the tension has simmered over a few inches of a shared driveway. One neighbor finally decides to build a heavy permanent fence right down the disputed line. To predict if the other neighbor will react with physical violence, we must look at his reality. First, does he feel justified? In his mind, his rightful land is being stolen in broad daylight, making his seething anger feel entirely righteous and warranted. Second, does he perceive any alternatives? If he believes the city council has ignored his complaints and lawyers are far too expensive, his non-violent options vanish, making a physical confrontation seem like his only remaining tool. Third, how does he view the consequences? If his identity and pride are so deeply tied to this piece of land that losing the dispute feels worse than going to jail, the consequences of violence suddenly become tolerable, perhaps even favorable to him. Finally, does he have the ability? If he possesses the physical strength or a weapon to inflict harm, the final piece of the puzzle locks into place. When justification is high, alternatives are non-existent. Consequences are acceptable, and ability is present. Violence is practically guaranteed. Every human action is created twice, first in the mind as an idea, and second in reality as a physical execution. Because of this undeniable truth, there are always pre-incident indicators, detectable warning signs and behavioral shifts that reliably precede an event. Once we recognize these signs, we must decide how to prepare and protect ourselves. We evaluate our response by measuring the reliability of our prediction, the importance of avoiding the bad outcome, and the cost and effectiveness of our precautions. If someone predicts you will be struck by lightning tomorrow and offers to sell you a $50,000 lightning-proof suit, you will decline. The importance of avoiding death is absolute, but the reliability of the prediction is absurdly low, making the immense cost entirely unjustified. But if a renowned cardiologist tells you that you need a $50,000 surgery to survive a failing heart, you will find the money immediately. The reliability is high, and the outcome is critical. We unconsciously perform this exact same evaluation regarding our personal safety every day, weighing the emotional and social costs of taking action against the likelihood of danger. Predicting the unknown is not a parlor trick or a mystical gift. It is a systematic, deeply human process of gathering context, respecting the timeline of pre-incident indicators, and demanding brutal objectivity from ourselves. We must be willing to accept that the absolute worst outcome is just as possible as the best. When we throw the spear of our intuition into the dark jungle of the unknown, we must be brave enough to send our conscious intellect in after it, to see exactly where it landed. By understanding how people justify their actions and weigh their alternatives, we strip away the terrifying mystery of human behavior. And as we will soon explore, the very words people choose to speak can illuminate their darkest intentions long before they ever take a single physical step toward violence. Aitan Chakop-in. Chapter 4. Words as Weapons. There are a few specific words in the English language that, when strung together, have the power to instantly freeze the blood in your veins. I am going to kill you. That sentence has likely triggered more sheer panic and high-stakes predictions than any other combination of words ever spoken. When someone intrudes upon your peace of mind with such a visceral, violent image, the natural human reaction is profound anxiety. It is deeply disturbing to realize that another person is willing to raise the stakes of a conflict to the ultimate consequence, exploiting your fear to bend you to their will. But the very deployment of those terrifying words reveals a truth that is actually quite empowering. For the moment, the speaker has chosen words over action. A threat is not a guarantee of violence. It is a communication of profound frustration. When a person resorts to threatening you, they are unwittingly betraying their own sense of powerlessness, proving that they have entirely failed to influence you or the situation in any other way. They are out of logical arguments, out of charm, and out of leverage. Threats are dispatched like desperate soldiers with a single strict order to cause an anxiety within you that cannot possibly be ignored. The speaker wants to see you pale, to see you tremble, and to hear you beg for a compromise. If you react with terror, you validate their tactic and turn their hollow words into solid gold. But if you can remain completely unaffected, their ultimate weapon instantly turns to tin. To effectively disarm these verbal weapons, you must first understand the fundamental difference between a threat and an intimidation. These two concepts are often confused, but distinguishing between them is vital to your safety. An intimidation is a statement of conditions to be met in order to avert a harm, always containing conditional words like if, unless, or until. When someone says, if you fire me, you will regret it, they are not expressing a desire to commit violence. They are expressing a desperate desire to keep their job. The motive is baked right into the statement. A true threat, however, offers no conditions and no alternatives. It is a stark statement of intention, completely devoid of an unless, because the speaker of a true threat perceives no other way to get what they want. A genuine threat generally carries a higher likelihood of eventual danger than an intimidation. When we are confronted with menacing language, we naturally obsess over the specific gruesome words the speaker uses, but focusing on the vocabulary is a trap. In the realm of predicting human behavior, context is infinitely more important than content. The specific words a person uses are far less significant than the environment, the history, and the relationship between the two parties. Imagine a highly respected community leader who receives an anonymous letter. The letter reveals that the sender knows a deeply damaging secret from the leader's past, a past financial indiscretion that could ruin their current reputation. The sender demands a massive sum of money, promising to destroy the leader's life if the demand is not met. This is extortion, a classic form of intimidation, and it typically paralyzes the victim with fear. The instinct is to pay the money, to appease the extortionist, and to buy back a fragile peace of mind. But paying an extortionist does not buy silence. It merely rents it. You are entering into a binding agreement with someone who has already proven they cannot be trusted to honor any agreement. The most radical, empowering defense against this kind of psychological warfare requires immense courage, but it is flawlessly effective. You take away the secret. If the community leader proactively steps up and discloses the past indiscretion to their family, their board of directors, or their community, the extortionist's leverage evaporates into thin air. The victim alone determines the value of the threat. By refusing to be paralyzed by the fear of disclosure, you strip the attacker of their only weapon, leaving them holding an empty threat that no longer carries any weight. While explosive threats are terrifying, there is another form of psychological intrusion that can be just as destructive to your peace of mind, precisely because it is so highly praised by our society. From the time we are children, we are taught to worship persistence. We are told to never give up, to keep knocking on the door until it opens, and to view rejection as merely a stepping stone to success. But when applied to unwanted interpersonal relationships, persistence is not a virtue. It is a glaring warning sign. Consider a freelance graphic designer who briefly chats with an enthusiastic entrepreneur at a local networking event. They exchange business cards out of sheer courtesy. 2 days later, the entrepreneur calls, proposing a massive, convoluted business partnership. The designer politely declines, citing a full schedule, hoping to let the eager stranger down easy, but the entrepreneur completely ignores the rejection. He views the designer's gentle hesitation not as a boundary, but as a negotiation. He begins calling daily, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails, manufacturing a fictional commitment that the designer never made. He shows up at the designer's co-working space, uninvited, demanding to know why his grand vision is being ignored. The designer is baffled and increasingly anxious, feeling trapped by the sheer weight of this stranger's relentless attention. This is a person who refuses to let go. Someone whose extraordinary sense of entitlement completely overrides the autonomy of others. When dealing with this type of relentless pursuit, victims invariably make a critical mistake. They engage. Out of sheer exhaustion, the designer might finally answer the 20th phone call just to firmly shout, "Leave me alone!" But the content of that shout does not matter to the pursuer. The only thing the pursuer registers is that it took exactly 20 phone calls to earn a response. You have just taught them the exact price of your attention. This is the deadly trap known as engage and enrage. When you are desperate to make someone leave you alone, the absolute worst thing you can do is try to reason with them, negotiate with them, or attempt to explain your boundaries one more time. They do not speak the language of logic, and there is no straight talk for crooked people. If they were reasonable, they would not be harassing you in the first place. Every single time you interact with them, even to express your anger, you are throwing fresh fuel onto the fire of their obsession. You are validating their relentless campaign by proving that they still have the power to impact your emotional state. Victims often fantasize about bringing in a heavy-handed authority figure to scare the pursuer away. They might ask a tough friend to pay the harasser a visit or have the police deliver a stern warning. We desperately want to believe that if a pursuer realizes they could get into trouble, they will logically decide to stop. But aggressive interventions frequently backfire. When an obsessed, entitled person is confronted by authority, they often feel profoundly emasculated and humiliated. You have essentially challenged their identity and threatened their sense of control. Rather than retreating, they often escalate their behavior to prove that they cannot be intimidated, turning a frustrating annoyance into a dangerous vendetta. The hardest, yet most effective strategy for dealing with unwanted persistence is absolute, unwavering silence. You cannot control what the pursuer thinks, and you cannot force them to become a reasonable person. You can only control your own reactions. Not responding is not a passive surrender. It is a highly active, strategic management plan. By refusing to return calls, return letters, or acknowledge their existence, you are sending the most powerful communication possible. You are impenetrable. You are proving that their persistence will yield absolutely no reward. It takes immense patience and discipline, but time is your greatest ally. If you starve the fire of oxygen, eventually it will burn itself out. Chapter 5. The Volatile Workplace. We spend the vast majority of our waking hours tethered to a physical or virtual space, surrounded by people we did not choose to bring into our lives. The workplace is a unique ecosystem where our financial survival, our social standing, and our personal identities are intimately intertwined. Because the stakes are so incredibly high, the office can become a crucible for intense human emotion. When a terrible act of violence shatters this environment, the media almost always falls back on the exact same hollow phrase. They say the perpetrator simply snapped, but human beings never just snap. Violence is a process, one that is as observable, gradual, and predictable as water coming to a boil. To truly understand occupational hazards, we must look closely at the individual who brings this volatility into the organization. Think of an employee you may have encountered who treats every piece of constructive feedback as a deeply personal attack. This person operates from a rigid, inflexible narrative where he is the perpetual victim, and management is entirely composed of antagonists conspiring to hold him back. We can call this psychological archetype the script writer. He effectively writes the script for all of his interactions, expecting his colleagues to slight him, betray him, or sabotage his work. Because he projects these terrible motives onto everyone around him, he approaches every conversation with chronic hostility, ultimately creating the exact rejection and alienation he so deeply fears. Over time, this dynamic creates a suffocating atmosphere of dread. Instead of sitting this employee down and decisively correcting his insubordination, managers often become paralyzed by the fear of his reaction. They choose the path of least resistance. They shift him to a different department, change his shift, or quietly sweep his aggressive outbursts under the rug, desperately hoping he will magically become someone else's problem. But ignoring non-compliance does not cure it. It actively endorses it. The employee learns that his hostility successfully shields him from accountability. Eventually, the day arrives when the situation becomes entirely untenable and the organization is forced to terminate his employment. For a healthy, balanced individual, losing a job is a painful and stressful setback. For the deeply invested scriptwriter, however, it is the total, catastrophic collapse of his world. This is the precise moment we must view the situation through the lens of human behavior, evaluating his justification, alternatives, consequences, and ability. When his income, his daily purpose, and his social status are forcibly stripped away, he suddenly feels a profound, righteous justification for revenge. Because he has exhausted all of his appeals and burned all of his bridges, he perceives absolutely no alternatives to striking back. His sense of humiliation is so absolute that the terrible consequences of violence now seem perfectly tolerable, perhaps even favorable, because retaliation proves to the world that he cannot be casually discarded. And if he has access to the building or possesses a weapon, the ability to inflict harm is already in his hands. If an employer fails to handle this delicate transition firmly and early, they inadvertently invite a highly dangerous sequence of events into their lives. This sequence manifests as a distinct pattern of threats, intimidations, manipulations, and escalations. When the problem employee realizes his usual manipulative tactics are no longer keeping him employed, he raises the stakes. He wants to cause fear and anxiety in the people who fired him, desperately trying to force his way back into a position of control. If you negotiate with him at this stage, or if you answer his hostile late-night voicemails, you are teaching him that his intimidation is working. How then do we handle the inevitable separation of a volatile employee? We must fiercely protect what is known as the dignity domino. Picture an employer dragging a failing worker into a glass-walled conference room in the middle of a busy Tuesday afternoon. The employer surrounds himself with armed security guards to project power, and then proceeds to deliver a long condescending lecture about every mistake the worker ever made. This employer has just committed a grave tactical error by stripping the employee of his pride in front of his peers, treating him like a violent criminal before he has committed a crime, and dragging him into a debate about the past. The employer has knocked over the dignity domino, virtually guaranteeing an explosive reaction. A successful, secure termination relies on absolute grace and uncompromising finality. It should happen out of the view of other employees, ideally at the end of the workday, and preferably at the end of the work week. This ensures that the terminated employee does not wake up the following morning with nowhere to go while his former peers are busy gossiping about him at the office. The decision must be delivered directly and compassionately by a manager who absolutely refuses to negotiate or rehash the past. The entire conversation must remain relentlessly focused on the future, helping him figure out how his mail will be forwarded or how reference calls will be handled. By treating him with unwavering respect and preserving his dignity, you completely deny him the justification he is desperately seeking to fuel his rage. You prove that you are not the villain in his script. Of course, the absolute best way to manage a dangerous employee is to never hire them in the first place. It is a profound tragedy of modern business that organizations will routinely hand over the keys to their buildings and the safety of their staff to total strangers without making a single phone call to verify their past. We accept glaring gaps in employment history and blatantly evasive answers because we are in a frantic rush to fill a vacant desk. But the interview process is a golden opportunity to let your intuition scan for warning signs. If you ask a candidate to describe the worst boss they ever had, and they launch into a bitter, venomous tirade that blames everyone else for their failures, you're looking directly at a massive red flag. By taking the time to call past employers and digging beneath the polished surface of a resume, you can uncover a hidden history of harassment, insubordination, and violence for the minimal price of a phone call. A workplace is not just a building, it is a community. When a co-worker's intuition signals genuine fear, or when an employee senses that a colleague's sullen depression, explosive temper, or strange obsession with violent news stories is crossing a dangerous line, that quiet alarm must be honored. We must cultivate environments where reporting a disturbing interaction is welcomed rather than brushed aside. A manager is never wrong for putting the physical safety of their team first, for asking the difficult questions, and for communicating their concerns before a tragedy occurs. True leadership means acknowledging that human volatility exists, and having the courage to read the writing on the wall long before the water ever comes to a boil. Chapter 6. The Danger at Home. The home is meant to be our ultimate sanctuary, the one place where we can pull up the drawbridge, lock out the chaos of the world, and be entirely safe. Yet, for millions of people, the home is the most dangerous place on earth. When the unthinkable happens behind closed doors, society often rushes to soften the blow with romanticized language. We hear a terrible act of domestic homicide described as a crime of passion, a phrase that paints a picture of a blinding, uncontrollable fury that simply overwhelmed an otherwise decent person. But this phrase is not a description of a crime. It is an excuse. It is a defense strategy designed to mask a deeply unsettling truth. Spousal violence is rarely an explosion of sudden rage. It is a long, slow process of control, escalation, and calculated decisions, making it one of the most highly predictable crimes in our society. The journey into this nightmare almost never begins with violence. If an abuser showed his true face on the first date, no one would ever stay. Instead, he often appears as the sweetest, most attentive, and most intensely devoted partner imaginable. He accelerates the pace of the courtship at a dizzying speed, prematurely pushing for commitment, moving in together, and declaring that your union was destined to be. To the hopeful heart, this feels like a fairy tale. To your intuition, however, it is a glaring survival signal. This rapid acceleration is not romance. It is the frantic securing of a captive audience. Once the commitment is established, the subtle tightening of the leash begins. He wants to know where you are at all times, not out of genuine concern, but out of a desperate need for control. He slowly isolates you from your friends and family, convincing you that they do not truly understand your special bond, or that they are secretly trying to tear you apart. He projects extreme emotions onto mundane interactions, flying into jealous interrogations if you spend too much time talking to a coworker or a neighbor. He uses money, transportation, and guilt to restrict your movements, all under the heavy, suffocating guise of a profound and protective love. When the tension finally boils over, the violence usually begins symbolically. He does not strike you first. He strikes the wall next to your head. He shatters a dinner plate, rips a cherished photograph, or destroys a piece of furniture you love. These acts of symbolic violence are profound warnings. He is visually demonstrating exactly what he is capable of doing to you, while testing your boundaries to see what you will tolerate. When the physical blow finally lands, it is almost always followed by a flood of intense apologies, weeping, and desperate promises that it will never, ever happen again. This cycle creates a devastating psychological trap that observers completely fail to understand. People look at a battered partner and ask, why doesn't she just leave? The answer lies in the deeply complex way human beings process fear and relief. Logic dictates that you should flee a burning building, but the dynamic of intimate abuse scrambles our deepest primal instincts. It sets up a tragic, impossible conflict between the instinct to maintain a secure family unit and the instinct to flee a dangerous environment. Like a person surviving a grueling trauma, the victim becomes addicted to the overwhelming, euphoric relief that immediately follows an attack. During this desperate honeymoon phase, the abuser returns to being the charming, attentive partner from the beginning of the relationship. The abuser becomes the only person on earth who can deliver that profound peace, holding the absolute key to the victim's emotional survival. The worse the abuse becomes, the more intoxicating the subsequent periods of peace feel by contrast. Over time, the natural human instinct for self-preservation is quite literally beaten out of the victim, replaced by a shell-shocked belief that perhaps this most recent terrible incident will finally be the last. If you were to ask a victim of abuse what she would do if her own daughter were being treated this way by a boyfriend, she would fiercely declare that she would kill the boy and drag her daughter to safety. The heartbreaking difference is that her daughter still has a fierce protector, but the victim no longer has herself. Her self-protective identity has been systematically erased. To break this paralyzing cycle, we must confront a difficult but immensely empowering truth. While the abuser is always entirely responsible for his horrific actions, staying in the environment is a choice. The first time someone strikes you, you are a victim. The second time, you are making a choice to stay. Acknowledging this is not about assigning blame to the sufferer. It is about reclaiming stolen agency. If we dismiss the victim's participation as a condition completely beyond her control, we strip her of her power. Viewing staying as a choice is absolutely critical, because if staying is a choice, then leaving is a choice as well. However, leaving is terrifying, and rightly so. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is almost never during a heated domestic argument. It is the moment the victim finally decides to walk away. Estrangement, not argument, is the trigger for the absolute worst violence. The sudden, total loss of control drives the abuser to escalate, moving from intimidation to relentless stalking and tragically sometimes to fatal violence. This is why leaving cannot be a dramatic, cinematic confrontation. It requires a quiet, meticulous escape plan. It involves trusting your fear, quietly copying keys, gathering vital documents, and securing a safe haven in the underground railroad of shelters before you ever make your move. We must also critically examine how we select our intimate partners in the first place, because the seeds of these nightmares are often planted in our earliest choices. Many people fall into the perilous trap of dating for potential. They see an aggressive, rigidly controlling partner and tell themselves that with enough patience and love, he will eventually calm down. They mistake the brooding, silent type for someone deeply mysterious and strong, ignoring the stark reality that his silence merely masks a volatile inability to communicate. Betting your physical and emotional safety on someone's potential is a guaranteed way to silence your own intuition. It forces your imagination to focus entirely on the idealized person they might become tomorrow, blinding you to the dangerous reality of exactly who they are today. If you feel a nagging apprehension about your partner's temper, if you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering a disproportionate rage, or if your intuition whispers that you are slowly being erased from your own life, you must listen. True love does not require you to sacrifice your survival instincts. The ultimate guardian of your safety is that quiet voice inside you. And when it tells you that the person sleeping beside you has become the enemy, it is time to believe it and walk away. Chapter 7. The Perils of Rejection. From the time we are old enough to understand social interactions, we are handed a heavy, invisible burden. We are taught that it is our absolute duty to protect the feelings of others, even at the expense of our own comfort. We are conditioned to be polite, to be accommodating, and above all, to never be perceived as harsh or unkind. When someone shows interest in us, even if that interest is entirely unwanted, our first instinct is almost never to set a firm, immovable boundary. Instead, we tie ourselves in emotional knots, trying to figure out how to let them down easy. We mistakenly believe that if we can just find the perfect, gentle combination of words, we can extract ourselves from an uncomfortable situation without causing any offense. But in the realm of unwanted pursuit, trying to let someone down easy is not just ineffective, it is a dangerous trap that actively fuels the very behavior you're desperately trying to escape. To understand how this trap springs shut, we must explore the deeply suffocating dynamic of the accelerated courtship. Imagine a woman who attends a casual dinner party and strikes up a polite conversation with a man she has never met before. He is engaging, seemingly attentive, and quick to laugh. They exchange contact information as she leaves, a standard modern courtesy. But before she has even turned the key in her front door, her phone chimes with 3 long messages from him. He expresses a breathless enthusiasm that feels entirely out of proportion to a 30-minute conversation at a crowded party. When she replies the next morning with a brief, polite text, hoping to slow the momentum, he instantly responds with a sweeping declaration about how rare their connection is, suggesting they spend the entire upcoming weekend together. This is not the blossoming of a grand romance. This is the frantic establishment of unearned intimacy. The woman feels a quiet, nagging apprehension, a tightening in her chest that tells her this is simply too much. too soon. But her societal conditioning immediately rushes in to drown out her intuition. She tells herself that she should be flattered. She rationalizes that he is just a very passionate, expressive person. She does not want to be a cynic who rejects a nice gesture. So she tentatively agrees to a short coffee date, hoping she can casually dial back his intensity in person. This is the exact moment the predator seizes control. He recognizes her hesitation, and rather than respecting her pace, he moves to overwhelm her defenses completely. During their brief date, she casually mentions that her car has been making a strange noise. The next morning, she walks out to her driveway to find him standing there with a toolbox, cheerfully announcing that he took the liberty of showing up early to fix the engine for her. He has not asked for permission, he has simply invaded her space under the guise of an incredibly generous favor. If she objects, she looks wildly ungrateful. If she accepts, she is instantly buried under a mountain of emotional debt. This is the dating equivalent of loan sharking. The predator is manufacturing a profound sense of obligation, creating a dynamic where the victim feels she simply cannot say no to future requests without appearing cruel or heartless. When a person begins showering you with extravagant favors, unsolicited gifts, or massive commitments just days after meeting you, they are not offering love. They are purchasing leverage, they are building a golden cage, and every unsolicited favor is another bar sliding into place. As the weeks progress, the cage shrinks. The pursuer begins to display a possessiveness that is entirely unwarranted for such a new relationship. He demands to know her whereabouts, becoming visibly agitated if she does not respond to a message within minutes. He starts subtly undermining her friendships, expressing a thinly veiled jealousy toward anyone who occupies her time. He expects her to account for her schedule, slowly severing her ties to her support system and isolating her in a world where he is the only focal point. He begins talking about serious, long-term commitments, moving in together, combining finances, planning a life, with a terrifying certainty that completely ignores her visible discomfort. When the victim finally realizes that she is suffocating, that this attention is not affection but absolute control, she attempts to end it. But because she is a decent, empathetic person, she tries to do it nicely. She says things like, "I am just really overwhelmed with work right now," or "I don't think I'm in the right headspace for a serious relationship at this moment." She uses soft, conditional language, hoping he will read between the lines and graciously bow out. But a person who refuses to hear the word no does not read between the lines. An obsessive pursuer treats a soft rejection not as a boundary, but as an obstacle to be overcome. When you say, "I am too busy right now," he hears, "I will be ready later." When you say, "I am not ready for a relationship," he hears, "You just need to try harder to convince me." By trying to spare his feelings, you are inadvertently providing him with a roadmap for exactly how to continue his pursuit. You are giving him hope, and in the context of stalking, hope is the most dangerous fuel on earth. When he refuses to accept the gentle rejection, the situation rapidly devolves into a terrifying test of wills. He ignores her boundaries entirely. He shows up at her workplace uninvited, bringing flowers and acting as if they are simply having a minor lover's quarrel. He calls her friends, presenting himself as a heartbroken, misunderstood romantic, desperately trying to enlist them as allies in his campaign to win her back. He completely discounts her autonomy, essentially forcing her into a non-consensual relationship by demanding that she constantly manage his intrusive presence in her life. This is the grim reality of date stalking. The victim feels as though she is going crazy, constantly second-guessing her own right to privacy. She feels guilty for being angry at someone who claims to love her so much. But this is not about love. Love requires mutual respect, and it requires the absolute acceptance of the other person's free will. A person who ignores your rejection, who constantly pushes past your stated boundaries and who insists that they know what is best for you is engaging in a profound act of hostility. To break free from this suffocating dynamic, you must completely abandon the concept of letting someone down easy. You must give yourself absolute permission to be explicit, even if it feels jarringly rude. The word no must stand alone, unsoftened by apologies, explanations, or future conditions. You must look the reality of the situation in the eye and recognize that you are not dealing with a fragile heart that needs protecting. You are dealing with a relentless ego that is trying to consume you. When a pursuer refuses to let go, you must firmly and unequivocally state that the relationship is over, that you do not want any further contact, and then you must enforce that boundary with absolute silence. You cannot negotiate with obsession. You cannot explain your position to someone who has already proven they have no intention of listening to you. By removing the cushion of politeness, you strip the predator of the ambiguities they use to justify their continued harassment. Reclaiming your safety requires accepting that your primary duty is never to protect a stranger's feelings. Your primary sacred duty is to protect your own life, your own space, and your own unwavering right to say no. Chapter 8. The Shadows of Youth. There is a quiet, heavy tragedy in having to look at a child and wonder what kind of darkness might be brewing inside them. We are deeply conditioned to view youth through a lens of absolute innocence. When we see a yellow school bus, a crowded playground, or a teenager walking home with a backpack, we naturally want to believe in a world where children are inherently safe, both from the world and from themselves. When a devastating act of violence shatters that illusion, our first instinct is to reach for a comforting lie. We tell ourselves that the child must have suddenly lost his mind, that he simply snapped without warning. But as we have learned, no human being ever simply snaps. Children, just like adults, operate on a continuum of behavior, and the violence they eventually commit is the final link in a very long, observable chain. We send our children off to school each morning with the profound assumption that the institution will keep them safe. But the grim reality is that this is not always the case. The architecture of a school shooting, or any extreme violence committed by a youth, is built slowly over time, often right in front of the very adults tasked with their care. A troubled student does not wake up one morning and randomly decide to commit an atrocity. They are influenced by their environment, absorbing the lessons of a culture that frequently glamorizes destruction. They may draw dark inspiration from violent media, immersing themselves in incredibly realistic and intense video games that simulate the very acts they are contemplating. While a game itself does not create a killer, it can easily serve as a rehearsal space for a mind that is already deeply fractured and searching for a way to express its pain. To understand how a child reaches the point of lethal violence, we must look at the foundation of their lives. Millions of children suffer physical abuse every single year, living in homes where chaos and cruelty are the standard methods of communication. When a child is raised in an environment where sheer force is used to resolve conflicts, they internalize a devastating lesson. Violence is the ultimate currency of power. If they are constantly victimized, they eventually reach a breaking point where the instinct to survive overrides the natural innocence of childhood. Even a child can begin to calculate the exact elements of a lethal response when they feel hopelessly trapped. Consider a deeply revealing scenario involving two young brothers living under the tyrannical rule of a violently abusive stepfather. After enduring years of terror, the boys decided they had finally suffered enough. Lacking the physical strength to fight him and having no access to a firearm, they evaluated their alternatives and turned to a lethal poison. They poured highly toxic bug spray into their stepfather's wine bottle, watched him unknowingly drink it, and quietly waited for him to collapse and die. Because the man miraculously survived, the boys did not become murderers, but the psychological mechanism of their decision was identical to that of any adult killer. They felt absolutely justified. They perceived no other viable alternatives to escape their daily torture. The consequences of him dying were highly favorable to their survival, and they found the ability to execute the plan using what they had. When we apply this exact same behavioral evaluation to a student planning a mass tragedy at school, the warning signs become terrifyingly clear. The troubled child often feels profoundly persecuted, either bullied relentlessly by his peers or completely ignored by a system that refuses to intervene. This builds a towering sense of righteous justification. Because a young mind lacks the life experience to understand that the misery of high school is temporary, the child perceives absolutely no alternative to his current suffering. Tomorrow looks exactly like today, stretching into an agonizing infinity. Because he is often deeply depressed and frequently does not intend to survive his own attack, the consequences of prison or death hold absolutely no deterrent value. When he finally gains access to a weapon, the ability is secured and the tragedy is set in motion. Yet, despite the presence of these glaring behavioral indicators, the adults in the child's life almost always look the other way. Parents will find a sinister, violent drawing in their son's notebook and dismiss it as mere teenage angst. Teachers will read a dark, threatening essay and filter it through the heavy, comforting lens of denial, telling themselves that the boy is just expressing himself or going through a phase. A profound conspiracy of silence forms around the troubled youth because acknowledging the reality of what he is becoming is simply too horrifying for the community to bear. This denial is the greatest ally a violent child has. It allows them to quietly accumulate grievances, to refine their dark fantasies, and to build an armory while walking the halls of the very institution that assumes it is keeping everyone safe. The tragedy is not merely the violence that eventually erupts, it is the absolute failure of the surrounding adults to honor their own intuition. They felt the apprehension, they saw the warning signs of future violence, but they actively chose to negotiate with their own fear rather than confront the reality of the situation. We must dramatically shift our approach to the young people in our lives. We cannot afford to dismiss cruelty, obsession with destruction, or explicit threats as normal growing pains. If a child begins to exhibit a profound lack of empathy, if they constantly identify with historical monsters, or if they speak about violence as a justified solution to their problems, we must lean into the discomfort. We must ask the hardest possible questions of them, of their teachers, and of ourselves. We must pierce the veil of denial and refuse to accept the hollow comfort that it could never happen here. Protecting our communities does not require us to view every quiet, sullen teenager as a ticking time bomb. It requires something much more profound, the courage to see our children exactly as they are, rather than exactly as we wish them to be. When we honor our intuition and take the dark signals of youth seriously, we gain the precious opportunity to intervene before the final link in the chain is forged. By confronting the shadows, we have the power to alter a child's trajectory, potentially saving them from their own brewing darkness and saving countless others from the devastating cost of our silence. Chapter 9. The Extremes of Human Behavior. There is a realm of human experience that exists at the very edge of our understanding, a place where the ordinary rules of social engagement seem to entirely evaporate. When we look at the lives of those thrust into the intense, blinding spotlight of public attention, or when we are confronted with acts of violence so catastrophic and bizarre that they defy basic comprehension, our first instinct is to distance ourselves. We label the perpetrators as anomalies, monsters, or aberrations of nature. We tell ourselves that these extreme hazards are completely detached from the world we inhabit. But to truly master the art of predicting human behavior, we must walk directly into this shadows. We must accept that even the most extreme acts of violence are committed by human beings, and because they are human, their actions are bound by the exact same psychological principles that govern us all. To understand that the architecture of an extreme hazard, imagine a celebrated television journalist. Every evening, her face is beamed into millions of living rooms. To the vast majority of her audience, she is simply a trusted, familiar voice delivering the day's events. But to one deeply isolated man sitting alone in a quiet room, she is something entirely different. He has no friends, no meaningful employment, and no sense of purpose. Through the strange, one-way intimacy of the television screen, he begins to believe that she is speaking directly to him. He feels a profound, undeniable connection. He begins to write her letters. At first, these letters are filled with glowing adoration and praise. They are not threatening. In fact, they are overwhelmingly supportive. But as the weeks turn into months and his letters predictably go unanswered, the tone subtly shifts. He stops writing about the news and starts writing about destiny. He mentions that they are meant to be together, that he understands the secret burdens she carries, and that he is uniquely qualified to protect her from a hostile world. He signs his full name and includes his return address on every single envelope. In a typical corporate security office, a stack of letters like this might be completely ignored. The security team is far too busy dealing with an anonymous, profanity-laced death threat that was phoned in earlier that morning. They dedicate all their resources to tracing the terrifying anonymous call, brushing aside the quiet, persistent letters of the lonely man. This is a fundamental, potentially fatal misunderstanding of how extreme human behavior actually operates. An anonymous death threat, while incredibly frightening to receive, actually portends far less physical danger than a signed letter detailing a distorted, inescapable destiny. The person who calls in a bomb threat or mails an anonymous death threat is utilizing words as a weapon because they are seeking the thrill of causing fear without the consequence of being caught. They want to hide. They want to exert power from the shadows. But the individual who meticulously signs his name to 100 pages of delusional rambling is seeking the exact opposite. He is seeking an identity. For the most dangerous extreme actors, such as assassins and severe stalkers, the ultimate goal is not to escape apprehension. In their tragically distorted worldview, the perfect crime is not one where they slip away into the night. The perfect crime is one where they are caught on camera, guaranteeing that their name will be forever inextricably linked with the famous person they have targeted. They do not want to hide from the world. They want the world to finally acknowledge that they exist. Therefore, the absence of a direct, explicit threat in their communications does not mean there is an absence of danger. In fact, inappropriate communications that focus on destiny, divine right, or unyielding entitlement are the true, glaring warning signs of an approaching catastrophe. When we evaluate these extreme hazards using the foundational elements of human behavior, the terrifying logic of the predator becomes crystal clear. We must ask how this isolated, obsessed man evaluates his own reality. Does he feel justified in taking extreme action? In his mind, he has offered this journalist his entire soul, and her silence is a profound, humiliating rejection that demands a response. Does he perceive any alternatives? Because he has completely tethered his entire sense of self-worth to this one impossible illusion. He literally cannot imagine a life where he simply walks away. The most chilling shift occurs when we evaluate how he views the consequences of violence. For a healthy person, the prospect of life in prison or death is an absolute deterrent. But for a person who feels entirely invisible, the consequences of extreme violence are perceived as highly favorable. Prison is not a punishment. It is a permanent stage where he will finally be recognized, interviewed, and immortalized. Once this psychological threshold is crossed and he acquires the physical ability to carry out an attack, the tragedy is locked into motion. This counterintuitive reality applies to almost all extreme situations. We are conditioned by movies and television to believe that a villain will always announce his sinister intentions, monologuing about his grand plans before he strikes. But a true predator, one who is fully committed to an extreme and devastating outcome, has absolutely no desire to warn you. They do not issue ultimatums because they are no longer interested in negotiating your compliance. They are only interested in executing their design. This is why we must radically adjust how we respond to the extreme and the bizarre. When someone's behavior falls completely outside the boundaries of normal social conduct, our intuition immediately flags it. Yet, our logical mind often rushes in to minimize the threat, telling us that the person is simply eccentric, harmlessly eccentric, or just a little bit crazy. We use the word crazy as a convenient rug under which we sweep all of our discomfort. But dismissing an extreme behavior as mere madness blinds us to the systematic, calculated process that is actually occurring right in front of us. Understanding the extremes of human behavior is not about becoming deeply paranoid or living in constant fear of a high-profile assassination. It is about recognizing that the most bizarre, catastrophic outliers of violence operate on the exact same continuum as the everyday hazards we navigate in our offices and our homes. The extreme is simply the mundane turned up to its highest possible volume. By studying the darkest, most unfathomable edges of the human experience, we strip away the myth of the unpredictable monster. We learn that violence is a language, and whether it is spoken in a quiet suburban kitchen or on a brightly lit global stage, it is a language we have the power to translate, anticipate, and ultimately survive. Chapter 10. Embracing the True Gift. We spend an agonizing amount of our lives carrying a heavy, invisible burden. It is the burden of constant, low-grade anxiety, a relentless hum of what-ifs that plays in the background of our daily routines. We worry about walking to our cars at night. We worry about the people we hire, the people we date, and the people we pass on the street. We lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing tragedies that have not happened, and likely never will. We believe that by worrying, we are somehow preparing ourselves for danger. We are convinced that if we just imagine every possible terrible outcome, we will not be caught off guard. But this is a profound illusion. Worry is not a survival mechanism. It is an invention of the modern, overactive imagination. To truly master your own safety and live a life of genuine peace, you must first understand the vast, fundamental difference between worry and true fear. Worry is a state you choose to enter. It is a manufactured emotion, a projection of future possibilities that completely disconnects you from the present moment. True fear, on the other hand, is completely involuntary. It is not a lingering state of dread. It is a sudden, powerful, and fleeting survival signal that exists only in the presence of immediate, genuine danger. Imagine a man walking through a busy downtown district on a Tuesday afternoon. He is a chronic worrier. As he walks, his mind is spinning a web of hypothetical disasters. He wonders if the scaffolding above him is structurally sound. He imagines a car jumping the curb, and he worries that the group of teenagers laughing on the corner might suddenly turn hostile. His heart rate is slightly elevated, his shoulders are tense, and he is entirely exhausted by his own vigilance. He thinks this constant state of apprehension is keeping him safe. But then, as he turns onto a quieter side street, a man steps out from the recess of an alleyway and blocks his path. The stranger's hands are hidden in his pockets, his gaze is fixed, and the angle of his body is undeniably aggressive. In that exact fraction of a second, an incredible biological shift occurs. The chronic worrier does not think about the scaffolding anymore. He does not think about the car jumping the curb, his deadline at work, or the teenagers on the corner. Every single ounce of his manufactured worry completely evaporates, instantly replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity. Time seems to slow down. His breathing shallows, his vision locks onto the immediate threat, and a powerful silent voice inside his head tells him exactly what to do. Turn around and run. That is true fear. True fear does not paralyze. It empowers. It is a brilliant internal guardian that replaces all other thoughts and emotions, acting entirely on your behalf to navigate you away from hazard. It is an ally that steps forward, takes absolute control of your nervous system and says, "Do exactly what I tell you to do, and I will get you out of here." When we finally understand that this magnificent ancient defense system is always awake, always scanning, and always ready to protect us, a profound liberation takes place. If you know, with absolute certainty, that your intuition will sound the alarm the moment genuine danger is present, you no longer have to live in a state of constant, exhausting anticipation. You can put down the heavy shield of worry. You can trust that your internal guardian does not need your conscious mind to constantly search the horizon for monsters. Your brain is already processing the thousands of microsignals in your environment with a grace and speed that defies logic. You simply have to grant it permission to do its job. The tragedy of our modern society is that we have been taught to silence this guardian. We are conditioned to be polite at all costs, to offer the benefit of the doubt to complete strangers, and to rigorously seek logical explanations for our sudden apprehensions. When we feel the cold grip of fear in the presence of a predator, we actively try to talk ourselves out of it because we do not want to be perceived as judgmental or rude. We deny our own primal reality, choosing to ignore the survival signals that are staring us right in the face. But you do not have to live that way. You do not have to sacrifice your safety on the altar of social etiquette. You are the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary success, equipped with the most sophisticated cognitive processes in the natural world. You inherently possess the ability to read the subtle body language of strangers, to detect the hidden hostility in an unwanted suitor, and to recognize the slow, predictable escalation of a violent employee. The universal code of violence is not a mystery. It is a language you already know how to speak. Living fearlessly does not mean living recklessly. It does not mean walking blindly down a dark alley or ignoring the obvious realities of a dangerous situation. Living fearlessly means moving through the world with the quiet, unshakable confidence that you are fully equipped to handle whatever comes your way. It means honoring your boundaries, refusing to negotiate the word no, and instantly validating your own apprehension without demanding a spreadsheet of logical proof. When you stop denying your instincts, the world ceases to be a terrifying, unpredictable place. You begin to recognize that human behavior, no matter how extreme, follows a logical sequence. You learn that predators rely on your politeness, that manipulators rely on your empathy, and that obsessed pursuers rely on your engagement. By understanding their tactics, you completely strip them of their power. You are no longer an easy target. You are an awakened, aware human being who refuses to participate in your own victimization. This is the ultimate lesson of your own survival. Fear is not a curse designed to make you miserable. It is the most profound, beautiful gift of nature. It is the fierce, protective voice of life itself, demanding that you survive. Embrace it. Trust it without hesitation, without apology, and without a shred of doubt. When you fully accept the gift of fear, you will realize that you never have to be afraid of the world again, because the greatest protector you will ever need is already living inside you.